Well, it's come to that time. I feel like as an older musician, I finally need to have that talk with you out there that are younger. Sometimes it's a hard topic to discuss. There are a lot of opinions. There's a lot of false information, a lot of exaggerations. But I'm just going to have to come out and talk about it. It's time to talk about your cables. How many different cables are there? Why do you need so many cables? Are they really alive? Do they tie themselves in knots? I'm going to talk about what you need, what you don't need, what's real, what's hype, what to look for, and what the minimum you need to have to get started playing music. If you like this video, be sure and give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon if you want to be alerted whenever I post new content. So in this 2-minute tip segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about cables. And I'm going to start first with the obvious, the guitar cable. A little bit of history here. Believe it or not, this connector that you see on guitar cables is really old. This came about from the telephone industry. Maybe you've seen old videos from way back in the day where you had switchboard operators that would have these cables and then they would have to plug in to connect your call. That's the same type of connector. It's just that when electric guitars were being first designed and built, this was around and it kind of got adopted as the standard, and it works pretty well. Now there's different types of these connectors. Some of them are straight connectors. Some of them are angled, like this one. For pedal boards and things like that, or connecting different effects together, usually the angle ones are preferred. There's also some low profile ones, so you can get more pedals on your pedal board and not have the space be taken up by the actual connector itself. In terms of cable quality, yes, there are some cables out there that are really expensive and some people swear by them. When you're first starting out, will you tell the difference between a regular cable and one of the more expensive ones? It's hard to say. The only times that you'll really notice a difference is if you use too long of a guitar cable. As energy is passed down the cable, there will be some dissipation of energy, and that's what causes a high-end roll-off. When do you start to see that? Well, in your 20-foot guitar cable or a 10-foot or maybe even a 30-foot, you may not notice it. But when you run through, say, 20-foot to a guitar pedal that is non-buffered, meaning that it's true bypass, the signal goes straight through, and then you run through another 20-foot cable to your amp, that's 40 feet. You may see some tone difference. Now, when buying guitar cables, I always kind of recommend getting what's called a serviceable end on cables. That means I can unscrew it and get to where the connection is, because these will fail over time. And if you can repair them yourself with a soldering iron and a little bit of solder, you can save a lot of money down the road. So the guitar cable, very common even in audio applications. Don't confuse an instrument cable with a speaker cable that goes from an amplifier to a speaker cabinet. Those typically are much higher gauge cables, so they're heavier and they can handle the current that's going to be passing through them. Other types of cables. There are microphone cables. So microphone connectors have 3 cables in them, or 3 different conducting wires, whereas guitar cables only have 2. This you'll also hear referred to as what's called a high impedance cable, and then microphone cables as a low impedance cable. I won't go into all the details about how these are constructed, but you can usually run microphone cables for a much longer distance because of the way they're designed. They're not interchangeable. So to connect between a cable like this into a microphone input, you typically need what's called a DI box, which has both types of connectors and some circuitry on the inside to basically change the signal over to make it work. Now, same thing with these. I prefer serviceable ends, meaning that I can take it apart and fix it if I need to, versus a cable like this one that's not serviceable. I cannot take this one apart. Typically, these are going to be much less expensive, and if you're not playing out, you just want something to hook from your microphone to an interface box to your computer, this might be fine because you're not going to be unplugging it and plugging it back in a lot. It's not going to take as much abuse. You're going to get more life out of it. If you plan and go to play every weekend at some restaurant or bar, you'll want a heavier duty cable because it's going to take a lot more abuse, and these will fail more frequently. The more you think you might be abusing the cable, meaning playing out clubs, etc., the more you're going to want a heavier duty cable. A cable like this is actually jacketed, so it has rubber, but it also has a fabric enclosure around it. Sometimes these can be more expensive. I got this one off Amazon, and I think it was around $20 for a 20-foot cable. This one I've had for 6 or 7 years now, and it still works great. But then I do have some less expensive cables that I've had for 15 years and they work fine. It all depends on how you take care of them. Make sure you coil up your cables and put them away when you're not using them. When you leave them laying around, they're going to get stepped on, they're going to get pinched. All these can damage the cable over time. And believe it or not, I think they're slightly alive, because if you put a bunch of these in a box together and store it in the corner, somehow they'll end up tangled and tied up in knots when you go to pull them out. And even though you might have coiled them up and put them in there nice and neatly, when you go to take them out to use them, it's going to look like a complete mess. So another tip I have is to get Velcro. These little Velcro strips you can buy at hardware stores for a roll, and basically they're cable ties. And these will help keep your cables somewhat organized, so when you have them in a box together and you go to pull one out, they're separated. You don't end up with a complete disaster of cables. So that's my 2-minute tip. Again, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when I post new content. Keep practicing.